Welcome, welcome. I appreciate you joining us today. This is Lauren Fogelman of Business Success Solution, and today's topic is 5 offshoring mistakes every CPA firm ought to avoid, and my special guest is Anshul Agrawal. Some of the things we're going to touch on is to discover how top firms are cutting staffing costs while maintaining quality with offshoring strategies. We're going to also go into avoiding the biggest mistakes that CPA firms make when they do offshore. And we're going to touch on as well scaling your practice, increasing your firm's efficiency, and elevating client satisfaction with effective outsourcing solutions. So I suggest you have pen and paper ready because Anshul is very generous. He's very passionate about this topic. And we'll also let you know how you can find out more about Anshul as we wrap up. So Anshul is an offshoring expert and the innovator behind the direct ownership model of offshoring, as he's passionate with what he's been doing, and it's a little bit of a different angle. He's the founder of June 15th Consulting, and Anshul has guided numerous Fortune 500 companies in expanding their operations internationally. He now focuses exclusively on helping CPA firms build direct ownership teams in Argentina, India, and the Philippines. Anshul also hosts the June 15th podcast, sharing insights on global business strategies. He's lived and worked in the US, Canada, India, New Zealand, and he now currently lives in Toronto with his family. You can learn more about Anshul and June 15th Consulting at june15consulting.com. Anshul, I am so looking forward to this conversation. So thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely, Lauren. Thank you so much for the kind introduction and looking forward to our conversation. Happy to be here.
And I enjoy all of our conversations, the many that we've had leading up to this. So one of the things that I would like you to share before we get started is, how did you get into this particular approach to outsourcing? How did this come about?
So I have been into global expansion for 12 years. When I started my company, I started getting a lot of global work because of like my global background. But like 2 years back, one of my oldest clients, he became like a COO at an accounting firm. And he was like, we're a mid-sized firm. We can't find accountants in the US, and we're interested in building a global team. However, we don't want to outsource. We don't want to work with an agency. We want to have our own people. So we have full control. We get to set the culture, the processes, the quality, have all the data within like our teams and all the good stuff. He's like, but I can't pay you millions of dollars like the big companies do. And he was like, figure out a way for me to do it, for a mid-sized firm to do the same, hire employees. And that's what I did. And the more I looked into it, the more I spoke to CPA firms, I saw that offshoring was broken. The larger firms, they were super happy with offshoring. They were like, oh, we get to save money, we get to increase our capacity, and it's just amazing. While smaller firms were struggling with loss of control, inadequate quality, and they were like, it's not that outsourcing is bad, it's okay. It leaves a lot to be desired. So that's when I was like, well, I need to figure out a new way for firms to do this. And that's how this direct ownership model came to play. It came into play. Like, how can I help even a small firm have their own employees in these new countries? So they get the benefits that these larger firms do, but without having to pay a lot of money.
And with that, I think that you have a unique perspective, first of all, about talking and focusing on some of the inadequacies or the problems that come with offshoring, that loss of control, the inadequate qualities, as well as the solution being direct ownership model. So I know that you have been helping firms build those offshore teams. So I'm curious, we started talking about the mistakes, and what do you see as maybe one of the primary mistakes that firms are making over and over, and it actually affects their offshoring success?
I think the biggest mistake that applies to like 99% of the firms when they are looking at offshoring, these firms, I'm not talking about the top 1,000 firms or the top 500 firms, everybody else, right? They make this mistake where they assume that I can't have my own employees because it must be too expensive. It must be a lot of work. And they don't even explore that option of direct ownership. That I feel is the biggest mistake. Larger firms, they look at all options. All right, if I partner with somebody, these are the pros and cons. If I have my own team, these are the pros and cons. But smaller firms, they just assume that they have no option but to work with an agency. And that is the single biggest mistake people make. And that's the first mistake they made. Like day one, they're like making this assumption. And that then impacts their offshoring success because now they don't have control. Now they're working with people who are not really their employees. They don't get to extend their culture. They don't get to extend their processes. So it's just right off the bat, you're getting started on the wrong foot. So that I believe is the biggest mistake where firms just assume that the only way to offshore is to go through an agency.
Mhm. And as you're talking about it, some of the things that come up for me if I were to want to offshore to another country is that going through an agency, they have all the equipment, they have all of the office space, and it's already set up. It's kind of like almost like a done for you. So how does that work if I was to go with the direct ownership model as far as giving people a place to work and some of the other controls that I would have onshore as opposed to offshore?
That's a great question. Well, that's where someone like me comes in,
Mm-hmm.
right? When I did it for the first time, I had to spend months for my first client figuring all of this out. But now all those things are taken care of. Let's say if you want to set up a team of 3 employees, I already have partnerships with co-working spaces like we work in all these 3 countries. So no matter which country you choose, there's already an office space waiting for you. All you have to do is sign the lease with them.
Hmm.
And it's pretty cheap. It'll be maybe like $100 a month per employee or something like that. So that's already ready to go. The same applies to technology. I already have preferred vendors in several cities in these countries. So no matter what your requirements are, we just work with your IT team or you if you're a solopreneur and get the laptops shipped, get the headphones, monitors, anything you need, right? It is plug and play. So then there's compliance. So there's 2 options, right? You can either register your own entity, which I don't advise for smaller firms, or you can use a PEO or like an employer of record. So they take care of all the local compliances, including managing the payroll, withholding taxes, um, administering benefits. So you work with your employee just like you do with your onshore employees. You work with them, you train them, but all the non-fun stuff somebody like me takes care of it, right? The infrastructure, the technology, the local compliance, even help with recruiting. You don't have to figure out how do I hire someone in Argentina? I've already figured out, I've talked to recruiters, I've tested recruiters in each of these countries. The day we start working, you get all of these services like inbound. And that's the biggest thing, right? That's one of the things also
Mm-hmm.
people assume that I want to hire my own employees, but I can't deal with all the other stuff. But that's the idea, right? Where somebody like me, we take care of all the non-fun stuff. So you focus on working with your employee and everything else is just a one-point contact and it's taken care of.
And I think that as I'm listening to you, the fact that you're taking care of the workspace, the technology, the compliance side of staffing, that, as you said, you've created a system so that it's more streamlined and it's actually easier as opposed to harder. So one of the things that I do hear over and over as I'm talking with firms about staffing solutions, onshore, offshore, is the training side of it. So they spend months training offshore staff, and then something happens. Somehow it falls apart. So where does CPA firms maybe stumble when it comes to the training side? And is there something that they can actually do differently to be able to avoid that from happening?
So a lot of CPA firms, even the big ones, they mess up training again and again. So let's pick a country. Let's take India, for example. What most firms do is they'll have their training materials for their US team members, and they'll just use that for their offshore team members. I mean, that is okay. That's a good start. But every group of people learns differently. Now, in India, when you're training people who are thousands of miles away, it is extremely important to have written instructions. And it's extremely important to have a lot of this on video. So there are tools like Loom that you can use where you're walking somebody through your screen and you record, like there's a small bubble with you that's kind of a voiceover. So you need to localize how you train your offshore team. And by localize, I mean think about how they learn best, how they prefer to be trained. So you need a lot of written instructions, you need a lot of videos. And the first time you're doing it, yes, it will be a lift for you. You'll have to go spend some time doing it. But then once it's made, you can use that again and again for new hires. So that's one of the biggest mistakes I feel CPA firms make when they're training. They don't localize how they train. They focus too much on what we're training, what we're teaching, but the how part, they often miss it. And I think if CPA firms fix that just one thing, they'll see a big improvement in performance.
And I think that that's something where we're both aligned, because I don't think it really matters whether someone is onshore or offshore. If you're going to add to your staff and start to expand, you want to have what I call a training library, where you're putting all of your processes, your procedures, even teaching someone about the culture of your firm and
Oh,
what you want the
absolutely.
client experience to be like, so that there's uniformity and consistency along all aspects of, working with clients, as opposed to maybe in one area you do it differently and somebody else does it a little bit differently. And then it's more of an organic approach. So part of what really picking up from talking with you is that even with how you train your staff, you want to systematize it so that there's this uniformity, kind of like taking the McDonald's approach, as opposed to it being kind of all over the place. Is that part of what you're focusing on as well with firms, is showing them how to systematize the training?
Absolutely, right? So one of the biggest things with me is I work as an advisor with all my clients. And one of the things is advising them on best practices. So whenever training comes up, I'm like, document everything. Document things that you don't think need
Mm-hmm.
documentation. Things like, how do you want your emails written, right? Something as small, like if somebody's emailing a client, is there an unset protocol that your team follows? Things like always copy a partner or always copy your senior manager or whatever that is. Document those things, right? And yes, you won't be able to document everything from day one, but as long as you have that approach of, all right, something went wrong, let's document it so the next person doesn't mess it up. And you're right, we have to take the McDonald's approach where we
Mm-hmm.
systemize as much as we realistically can. And that's what helps get you results.
Mm-hmm. And I think it also allows a firm to start to scale as well more effectively than if things were all over the place. Um, so one of the things I think that also comes into this, because we're talking about, even if we were to outsource onshore, from one side of the country to another in the US, it's very, very different, or from the US to Canada. But I know that you primarily do uh, offshoring in India, the Philippines, and Argentina. So there's also cultural differences between onshore and offshore teams. And that's something that sometimes firm owners struggle with because they don't understand it really. So is there a way to be able to work with the cultural differences as you're expanding your team globally?
Oh, absolutely. So cultural differences. So I feel like most firm owners, they know that there are cultural differences and that something needs to be done about it. But my problem is they focus on the wrong differences. I'll tell you what I mean by that. If you're setting up your team in India, it's good to know that a lot of people in India are vegetarians. A lot of people don't eat beef. So these things are good to know that India has like 14 languages. This will make for a good first conversation. However, knowing these things, is that going to get you the results that you're looking for? Because in the end, you're a business. You need results. It's not, because you were focusing on the wrong cultural differences. You need to focus on how your corporate culture is different than the general corporate culture in India. So I'll give you an example. Here in the US, when somebody asks questions, we love it. We take that as a sign that they're taking initiative, they're interested, and that they're being smart. They don't understand something, then they're asking us. However, if you look at, let's say, India, generally speaking, people are discouraged culturally from asking questions to their superiors in a public forum. Now, you're going to have a conference call with your India team. No one's going to ask any questions. And you'll be like, this is great. Everybody understood everything. You're going to get off the call and you're going to start getting emails. I did not understand X. I did not understand Y. Or somebody would just turn in the work and you'd be like, I told them on the call that this is not what I want. Why didn't they ask questions? Now you're thinking, I'm not getting the results I want from my offshore team. But the thing is, you should know that there is a cultural difference and people will not ask questions. So it's on you to make sure they ask questions. It's on you to tell them again and again, ask questions. You will not be penalized. You will be rewarded. Maybe even I've told clients that if the call is silent at the end, everyone's silent, just pick people and like, hey, do you have a question? Do you have a question? So it takes a few calls to get it right, but these are the kinds of cultural differences you need to focus on. And it's hard to know what these differences are, but like that's why you got to educate yourself. That's why you got to work with, an expert, a cultural expert who can tell you that, hey, these are some things you'll most likely run into, and this is how you address that. So that's how you fix cultural differences.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like as you're moving this direction of being a global firm, not only do you have to have the typical leadership skills, but you have to be able to be culturally sensitive to the nuances. And that part of what I've seen also when I visited, especially India, is that sometimes people will say yes, 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 because they want to be agreeable. They don't want to be disrespectful, but there might be something else that they're not telling you. So you have to be really good at getting beyond the surface of what is going on. Is that part of what's going on also, as people need to become better communicators?
Oh, absolutely. Like communication is key, right? Regardless
Mm-hmm.
if you're working with the person sitting next to you or somebody sitting thousands of miles away. You need to improve your communication skills like on an ongoing basis. That's true. But it becomes more important when you're working with somebody that's not in the country, that's from a different culture. And you need to go in making the assumption that a lot of things will get lost in translation, right? So it's your job as the leader to reinforce that, okay, what I said to this person, did that come through? And a simple thing to do is after you have a call with somebody, have them email you the key takeaways and next steps. So as
Mm-hmm.
simple as that, right? And when people have to do that, right, then you'll know right away whether or not they understood you. So you're right, communication is key, and just taking these small key steps can help you fix a lot of kinks with offshore communicating with your offshore team.
Okay, so anybody who's listening to us, Anshu just gave you a nugget. After you are meeting with someone, you want to make sure that they really absorbed what it was that you were saying in the way that you wanted them to be able to get it. So just have them email you with the key takeaways and the next steps. This works actually for onshore team as well as offshore. So that is just a key nugget that Anshu shared based on his experience. So the other thing that I see is you've been expanding into different regions. You originally were India and the Philippines. You just added on Argentina after being there and doing diligence and getting those things set up. So how does a firm know which area is the best place for them to be able to start adding to their global team? Is there any things that maybe they're not considering when they're choosing a particular country to outsource to?
So, I mean, that's one of the mistakes that I see where
Mm-hmm.
when people think offshoring, they think India, right?
Mm-hmm.
80% of offshoring happens in India. So, I mean, it's a fair assumption if that is the default destination, but people just assume that there is nowhere else I can go. And Philippines is a distant second, but as you said, like I think people should seriously consider Argentina. And one of the reasons I wanted to expand out of India was while India works for majority of the firms, it's not going to work for everyone. So let's take a 10-person firm in California, right? And they may not have the resources or the appetite to deal with the time zone difference. If they are new to offshoring, they may just prefer to have somebody work their same time zone. Now you'll find people in India and Philippines who work your time zone, but
Hmm.
ask yourself, if you are good at what you do, would you rather work normal hours or would you rather stay up at night? Right. So that's the thing, right? When you have people in India and Philippines work overnight hours, you're not going to get the best talent. So that's where I was like, all right, let's look at a different place. And that's where South America is awesome, right? Especially Argentina. Argentina has an excess of accountants. The economy is not doing so well right now, so there aren't as many jobs. That's where we come in. So, going back to your original question, how do I know where to
Hmm.
outsource? And you need to look at why are you outsourcing and what are your biggest fears? If you're outsourcing solely that, hey, I just want to cut costs, you look at South America, you look at Argentina, because that's going to be cheapest. If you are looking at, I want to build a team of 50 people, then you need to look at India, because India is the only offshoring destination that has the size of the talent pool where you can quickly scale to 50 employees. Right? If you are looking primarily at audit, Philippines does good audit. Like they have like a lot of good audit talent. Right. So that's how you need to look at it. You need to look at your fears. Right. I just want to play it safe. Offshoring is risky enough. Then you go to the safe destination, which is India. Or if you think that I love a global team, but I need them to work my hours, then you go to Argentina. So there's no like one way to look at it. Like I'm actually going to be putting out like a guide on offshoring destinations, so it'll be on LinkedIn, it'll be for free. That's one place to check out. But the idea is to start with, what do I really want and what am I scared of? And a combination
Hmm.
of the two, you'll find the right destination.
Hmm. I think some of the other things that come up for me as you were talking about Argentina, the Philippines, and India is that with Argentina, they're Spanish speaking, and the US has a large Spanish speaking population also. So it might actually be able to allow you to expand to reach clients that you wouldn't be able to reach with otherwise if you only focused on speaking English. Is that part of what you've seen with some of the firms that have been going into Argentina as well?
So that's a nice byproduct. When
Hmm.
I went in more looking at the talent landscape, the cost, the time zone, cultural proximity. But more and more people are like, I like the fact that I can have a team that's bilingual, like in English and
Hmm.
Spanish, because I do have clients who prefer talking in Spanish. I do have a lot of bilingual clients. A lot of farm owners themselves are bilingual, right? Especially like when I was in Los Angeles, right? I met so many farm owners who were bilingual, and that was their biggest attraction towards Argentina. Like, huh, that's interesting.
Hmm.
So you were right. I mean, that's a big like side advantage, I would say, of going to Argentina.
And the other thing that comes up I see for firm owners now that we're talking about choosing a country is about how do they tell their not just their staff. I'm thinking about their clients. So how do they inform their clients that maybe they are offshoring, or do they inform them? Because I know that if you're doing taxes, you have an obligation to inform, and there needs to be written consent. Whereas if it's the other side of accounting, you don't necessarily have that obligation. So how do you guide someone through that process?
So, I mean, as you said, if you're doing tax, like you have to
Hmm.
comply with 7216, and that's just the law. Even if you're doing like other stuff, even if you're just getting help with accounting or bookkeeping, I think it's always good to be transparent with your clients. The biggest fear people have is, what are my clients going to say? Are they going to leave me? And I can tell you from experience that doesn't happen, because your clients trust you. They trust your judgment. They trust your people. So when you tell them that, hey, I'm going to be hiring 2 employees in Argentina, they trust you. And that's why the direct ownership model helps, because they're your employees. So you get better buy-in. And I always tell people that, tell your clients why you're making that decision. Be very transparent. And most likely the reason is you can't find people here. And that's impacting your ability to serve your clients as well as you would like to. So with 2 or 3 or however many offer employees, here's how the client experience will improve. here's how we'd be able to make better deadlines. We won't ask you to file for extensions. So for example, a client could have been asking for bookkeeping services. Be like, now we can't offer that because now it makes
Mhm.
financial sense for us. So the
Mhm.
key is to be transparent. The key is to talk from a place of confidence and strength because you are doing it to do better by your client. And then just have an open line of communication. Your clients will have questions, and that's a good thing. Your clients may ask you about data security, may ask you about who you're hiring. So the more open you are, the better chance you have at getting your clients on board.
Excellent. So I want to focus a little bit more on the management side of things because managing a remote team, whether onshore or offshore, is different than how you would manage people that are in office. Anything that you see that tends to happen that kind of doesn't work out to the best possible way when it comes to managing remote teams? And is there something that you would suggest instead?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest challenge accountants have with remote teams is just the principle of it, right? Accountants, I think by nature, like control. Um, a lot of them are still uncomfortable with the fact that I don't want to work with somebody who's not physically in front of me. And I feel like the biggest challenge in what I do, I originally thought would be the stigma around offshoring, but it's more about stigma around remote working. So my advice to people is this is the future. Like your talent is asking for it. So focus on results rather than thinking about how many hours is this person working? Like, are they getting you the results on time? Are the results
Mhm.
good quality? Maybe tweak your SOPs. Like, how are you generally working? How do you tweak that to work better with a remote team? So changing the mindset first to go from process to result, I think that will make a big difference. Second is incorporating technology, like things like Zoom or Loom, the other tool that I talked about. Um, think about what are the things that are scaring you about remote work, and then use technology to address that. You can have like monitoring software on laptops
Mhm.
if you're worried about somebody's going to share your data with somebody else. If you're worried about people not submitting timesheets, all of that can be automated for like just a 20, $30 a month. So all of those tools exist. So changing the mindset, focusing on results and incorporating technology, I think those things will help you get better at managing a remote team.
And part of what you briefly touched on that I would like to talk about a little bit more, because I've talked with offshore staffing agencies about the security aspect because the team's working with sensitive information. How do you manage the security aspect of sensitive data with an offshore team when there's direct ownership?
So the good thing about direct ownership is there are no third parties that come across or even see your data. So that in itself reduces the risk a lot. With the outsourcing agency setup, the employees of the agency can see your data. They can't download it or they can't really uh, print or do anything, but they can still see it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's more than the threat of data getting stolen. It's more about the fact that it's uncomfortable. But with direct ownership, no one outside your organization even sees the data. So if you hire, let's say, two people in Argentina, they're going to get dummy laptops or shell laptops. They will VPN into your servers in the US. So your data will never leave the US. Then
Mm.
you can have monitoring software that disables downloading, printing, or emailing any data to any non-approved email address. So let's say if I was your employee and I emailed to my email address, you would get a notification. So there's a lot of monitoring software that you can use that's not invasive but still protects your data. Then with the offices, right? Let's say if we do a WeWork, there's biometric entry. You can have cameras installed, or you should have cameras installed. And with all of these things, right, it becomes very difficult to someone to do anything like, inappropriate with your data because there's no way to do it, right? They can get caught on camera. Their laptop has that software.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they take a photo with their cell phone, they're going to get caught, right? And that's how you take care of data. First, by eliminating all third parties. Second, by implementing monitoring software, biometric entry, disabling downloads, printouts, by doing all of these things, I would say your data is more secure when being accessed from a foreign country than it is in the US. Because a lot of people in the US don't have these uh, restrictions in place.
I'm in full agreement with you. What I've seen from my conversations and education is that when you actually go offshore, whether it's direct ownership or with an agency, there's a lot of security measures in place that firm owners don't consider when they just have someone working remote, but they're onshore. And I think that all the things that you've talked about regarding the monitoring software, the cameras installed, the biometrics, ought to be for any remote staff, no matter where they live, because we want to be able to protect our clients' sensitive information. So this is a move that I think ought to happen anytime you have remote employees. It doesn't matter where they live in the world.
Absolutely, I agree.
And so there's some challenges that happen sometimes right from the beginning when you are starting offshore. And I feel that prevention or doing things proactively is better than trying to fix something after the fact. So any red flags maybe that ought to be paid attention to when someone's considering making the investment of direct ownership offshore?
So it really depends on where you're going, what you're doing. I think one of the red flags is to look at the cost, right? When you are hiring employees, a lot of times employees could inflate salaries because they know it'll still be cheaper. So in terms of cost, look at about 50% savings. Like unless your overall team is coming, your offshore team is coming at around half the cost, I think you're making a mistake somewhere. The other thing is not to do what everybody else is doing, right? If everybody else is going to Mumbai, don't just follow that. Look at look at what will work for you. Exactly look at what will work for you. And there's a long list of these things, but here's the two things that you should do. First, educate yourself. Like educate yourself on the different options, the pros and cons of each option, educate yourself on what things have gone wrong for other firms, right? And the simplest thing to do is go on LinkedIn, go on Google, and start researching stuff. Like you'll find a lot of free advice, a lot of free white papers, guides. I mean, half of them written by me, but they're out there, right? So they'll tell you a lot of, they'll give you a lot of wisdom. So that will be the first thing to do. Second, talk to like-minded firms. You have a lot of people in your network who have a similar culture, who think the way you do. So talking to those people who have offshore, who are like-minded about what worked well for them, what mistakes they made, again, is one of the most important things you should do right off the bat, because that'll save you a lot of time and frustration. So educating yourself and then talking to peer firms.
And I think the other thing is that I'm sure you're someone who knows all the things to avoid. So if someone wants to be able to do this, but they're too busy to really find out all of the pros and cons, they can just speak with you directly, and you'll guide them through the process so that it's as smooth as possible with onboarding their new staff.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm on
so
LinkedIn.
It depends on if you want to DIY it yourself, or if you want to be able to have someone guiding you to avoid those costly mistakes. Sometimes, and a lot of times, it actually is more money and time saving going with someone who already knows how to do this, and this is what they specialize in.
Oh, absolutely. That's my pitch right there. That if you are looking at direct ownership, which you should be, even if it's just from like an evaluation standpoint, like reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn. I love putting out educational stuff. There's a lot of free stuff on my LinkedIn profile that'll answer a lot of questions. And there's a lot more coming in the next 6 weeks. So the best thing to do is get in touch with me on LinkedIn. I usually do like a free consultation call for for anyone that comes through a podcast. And there we cover like basic questions that you'll need to answer if you're thinking about offshoring. First is, should you offshore? Yes, for most firms, but not everybody should be offshoring. So that's the first question we answer. Second is, what model should you use? Like, should you go with an agency or should you do direct ownership? Yes, I do direct ownership, but if an agency model is better for you, I'm going to connect you with other agencies. Third is, what country do you go to? Do you go to India, Argentina, Philippines? Fourth is, how much is it going to cost you? When can you start to see an ROI? And the last one is, we'll create like a high level plan for you that, all right, if you start today, here are some things you need to do. Here's the timeline, and here's what you need to do to be ready, let's say in 3 months or 4 months. So that's what you can expect. And that's any listener of Lauren's podcast, they get this call for free.
I appreciate you offering that. That's very generous, Anshul. And so if anybody's been thinking about it and they would like the hand holding, they're too busy to really do all of the research themselves, and they just want it to be done for them because they see the benefits and you've been thinking about it and you're ready to jump in, then absolutely reach out to Anshul. I know he is all over LinkedIn. He is also has his podcast, the June 15th podcast. So some of the things that you and I have covered today is to discover how top accounting firms are cutting staff costs and maintaining the quality by using offshoring strategies, avoiding some of those main mistakes that CPA firms do make when offshoring, and being able to look at offshoring solutions to scale your firm, increase efficiency, and elevate client satisfaction. So Anshul, if somebody wanted to find out more about what you're doing in June 15th Consulting, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
The best way is LinkedIn. I am super active on LinkedIn. Send me a message on LinkedIn. You'll find my contact information there as well. But that's the best way to get in touch with me.
Anshul, thank you for the engaging conversation. This is Lauren Fogelman with Business Success Solution, showing accounting firm owners how to double their income working half the time.